The magnolias were heavy with bloom, their waxy petals glowing pale beneath the strings of fairy lights Caleb had hung along the fence. I carried the last tray of corn out to the picnic table, setting it down beside the platter of chicken. The yard smelled of smoke and sweetness, a mix of barbecue and blossoms that made me ache with a memory of summers long past when my husband still manned the grill and laughter spilled as easily as iced tea. 7 years had gone by since he left me a widow, and still the ache of absence came and went like a tide. But tonight was meant for family not longing. Caleb, now 38 and broad-shouldered from years of labor, flipped the last pieces of chicken, while Ivy darted barefoot across the grass chasing bubbles that shimmered under the fading light. Mara stood at the edge of the patio in one of her flowing dresses, smiling politely whenever a neighbor passed a compliment. To them, she was elegance embodied, perfect posture, careful laughter. To me, she remained a mystery, even after 10 years in our family. I slipped my phone from my pocket, eager to capture the moment. Photos had become my way of holding on tiny anchors against the rush of time. I framed the 4 of them together. Caleb laughing, Mara tilting her head just so Ivy mid-giggle with sauce smeared across her chin. The shutter clicked, freezing joy in pixels. My chest warmed. Yet even as I lowered the phone, my eye caught something else. Across the yard near the hedge where shadows pooled, Mara had stepped away. A tall man in a blue cap leaned close, passing her a small box no bigger than a matchbook. She slipped it quickly into her purse and returned before anyone noticed. Her smile was unchanged, her conversation uninterrupted, but the image seared itself into me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing, a neighbor returning a borrowed lighter, a harmless token. But the precision of her gesture, the quickness of her glance left me unsettled. I busied myself refilling glasses, urging Ivy to eat a little more, pretending not to think about it. By the time the sun had sunk fully and the guests trickled home, my unease dulled beneath the comfort of dishes washed and leftovers packed. Alone in the quiet house, I opened my phone again. The photo glowed on the screen, Caleb's arm around his wife. Ivy's wide grin, the glow of lights above them. A perfect picture, a perfect lie perhaps, but still mine to treasure. Without hesitation, I posted it online with a caption about family and gratitude. It wasn't 5 minutes later, as I settled into my chair with tea, that the phone buzzed again. A message flashed across the screen sharp enough to make me blink twice. "Celine, Mom, take that down. Now." I stared, stunned. My daughter, the one who had skipped the barbecue entirely, the one who had barely spoken to me in months, was suddenly furious about a photo she wasn't even in. My tea cooled in my hand as the words echoed terse and urgent. Celine. Always precise. Always guarded a lawyer who never wasted words. But this was not formality. It was panic. I set the cup aside, heart beginning to pound, and lifted the phone once more, the image of smiling faces staring back at me. It was just a picture, wasn't it? A summer evening, a backyard of family gathered close. Yet Celine's voice seemed to hum behind the words on the screen, sharp and desperate, as though the photo held something more than I could see. And before I could even decide how to reply, the phone began to ring. The ring startled me, slicing through the quiet of the house. Midnight was no time for anyone to call, especially Celine. My thumb hesitated over the screen before I answered, my voice unsteady. "Celine, delete it. Don't argue. Just do it." Her tone was clipped, trembling, as if she were speaking from the edge of a storm. I sat forward, the cushion sighing beneath me. "What are you talking about?" "The photo, Mother. Take it down. Right now. Her words carried the same authority she used in courtrooms, that familiar sharpness honed from years of being a lawyer, but beneath it, I caught a quiver. Celine never quivered. You weren't even here tonight, I said, carefully keeping my voice soft. Why does it matter to you? Her breath crackled against the line. Don't question me. Just do as I say. For a moment, I was 25 years younger, standing in our kitchen with Celine at 17, arms crossed chin high, her eyes hard with blame. That was the year after her father's funeral, when she accused me of moving on too quickly. She'd discovered I had coffee with an old friend, a man who had once been a colleague of my husband. It was innocent, nothing more than a shared grief, seeking companionship. But to her, it was betrayal. She never forgave me for it. Even when I explained, even when I swore I wasn't replacing her father, the distance settled in her like stone. Now, hearing her bark orders at me in the middle of the night, I felt that same stone pressing again. Celine, I said, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. This isn't like you. Why would a simple picture make you so upset I don't owe you an explanation? Just do it. Her voice cracked on the last word, and then the line went dead. The silence afterward was heavier than the call itself. I sat with the phone in my lap, staring at the dark window where the magnolia branches swayed against the glass. She hadn't even given me a chance to argue. She never did. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe she feared some client or colleague might stumble upon the post. But the urgency in her voice, raw and brittle, wouldn't leave me. I reopened the gallery, thumb brushing across the screen. There was the barbecue, the laughter, Caleb's broad smile, Ivy's sticky hands raised high. Mara's painted smile so precise, it seemed carved. And then something I hadn't noticed before. In the sliding glass door behind them, faint but unmistakable, a reflection. A woman, half-turned hair pulled into the sleek knot Celine always wore, a phone lifted in her hand. I leaned closer, zooming in until the pixels blurred. My breath caught. Celine. But she hadn't come. She'd told me she was too busy with a late deposition, that family gatherings were a distraction she couldn't afford. And yet, there she was, her outline clear enough to deny no longer caught in glass she must have forgotten was behind her. The phone slipped slightly in my hand. My own daughter had been there hiding unseen and now demanding silence. I closed the gallery, set the phone face down on the table, and sat in the thick dark of the room. Something pulsed in my chest, half fear, half determination. Celine had been there. And if she had been there, then she was hiding more than just herself. The next morning, I woke, still hearing her trembling voice. Delete it. Don't argue. Sleep came in fragments that night, restless and thin. Each time I closed my eyes, Celine's command echoed back, sharp, brittle, and trembling. By dawn, I had given up trying. The house was still. When I padded into the kitchen, brewed coffee, and set my phone on the table as if it might explain itself if I stared long enough. I opened the gallery again, scrolling past the smiling family poses to the unguarded moments I had captured between laughter and conversation. One photo taken hastily when I thought the light looked soft across the lawn caught me now with a force I hadn't expected. There was Mara, her laugh open, unpracticed, the way I rarely saw it. Beside her stood the tall man in the blue cap. His hand hovered near hers, almost brushing their bodies angled in toward each other, as though the rest of the gathering didn't exist. It wasn't the polite distance of neighbors chatting. It was warmth. It was closeness. I pinched the screen wider. my pulse ticking louder in my ears. Their fingers weren't quite joined, but the intention was there. A secret moment stolen in daylight. And then fainter still, the reflection caught me again. In the glass of the sliding door just behind the pair, Celine's figure lingered. Her posture rigid, her gaze unmistakably fixed on Mara and the man. She had been watching. I let the phone fall gently against the tabletop, pressing both hands to my mouth. Mara's smile, Celine's fury, both caught by my careless camera. Celine had once warned Caleb years ago that Mara was not what she seemed. I remembered the conversation as clearly as if I'd been listening yesterday. She'd cornered me in the hallway after Caleb announced their engagement. "She's after something, Mom. Don't let his soft heart blind you." At the time, I'd dismissed it as jealousy or bitterness. Celine could never resist a chance to prove her cynicism right. But what if she had been right all along? The thought of telling Caleb flickered, then faltered. He had always been the kind of man who carried burdens quietly, who met long hours at the engineering firm without complaint, who still made time to tuck Ivy into bed with stories he half invented on the spot. He saw good in everyone, especially Mara. To him, she was elegance and grace, the partner who steadied him. How could I put this poison in his heart without certainty? A blurred reflection, a laugh angled toward the wrong man, a daughter's panic. These were fragments, not proof. And yet my gut twisted with something I couldn't ignore. I stared at the images until my eyes blurred. The truth seemed to pulse in them, though it remained just out of reach. Mara's smile was too bright, too alive in that unguarded frame. Celine's reflection too sharp, her warning too neatly echoed. One woman wrapped in charm, another wrapped in panic. Both withholding, both pulling Caleb into a silence he didn't deserve. I closed the phone at last, the screen dark, my own reflection ghosting faintly against it. My hands trembled, not from age but from the weight of suspicion pressing down. I told myself I would wait. I would watch longer before deciding. But deep inside, I already knew waiting would not protect anyone. By the time Caleb arrived that afternoon, cheerfully dropping Ivy off for a few hours while he ran errands, my decision had grown heavier, more urgent. His smile was as steady as ever, his trust as unshaken, and I realized then how dangerous my silence might become. Ivy ran straight into the kitchen, chattering about a drawing she had made, while Caleb leaned against the doorway, tired but content. I studied his face, so open, so unguarded, and the question burned through me like fire. Which woman was lying to us, Mara, with her smile, or Celine with her panic? Caleb's house always smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender detergent, as though Mara wanted every corner to shine. I carried the dollhouse kit under my arm, its box nearly slipping from my grasp as I rang the bell. Ivy's squeal of delight when she opened the door nearly toppled me. She wrapped her arms around my waist, tugging me inside before I had a chance to greet anyone. "Grandma, is that for me?" Her eyes sparkled at the picture on the box. "It is," I said, laughing. "But you'll have to be patient. Building it takes time. Maybe we'll do it together next weekend." She beamed and dashed down the hallway box, clutched tight. I followed into the dining room where the table was already set. Mara stood at the head, her dress a pale cream hair pinned just so. She smiled at me, though the corners of her mouth barely lifted. "Althea, how lovely. You didn't have to bring anything." She said, her tone polite, practiced. "It's just a gift for Ivy," I replied, taking my seat. Caleb entered, then balancing a platter of roast chicken. He looked tired, circles under his eyes, but his voice was warm. Dinner unfolded in quiet patterns. The clink of forks murmured questions about work. Ivy's chatter about school. Celine's absence was not mentioned, though her empty place at the table seemed to pull at the air. I had invited her myself, but she claimed she was too busy. I wondered if her busyness was truth, or simply another wall between us. I waited until the plates had been cleared and Caleb was pouring coffee. I kept my tone light, as though it were nothing more than small talk. That picture I posted last weekend seemed popular online. So many cousins wrote to say how happy everyone looked. Mara's hand froze on her cup for the briefest moment before she set it down gently. Oh, I hadn't noticed. Her eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to me. Well, you know how it is. People on the internet will say anything. She gave a quick laugh and shifted the conversation with practiced ease. Ivy, why don't you show Grandma your new ballet steps? Ivy jumped up eagerly, twirling across the living room rug. Caleb watched with a smile, missing entirely the stiffness in his wife's shoulders, the guarded look she tried to mask. Later, when Ivy had dashed off to her room, I caught Caleb alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes. I leaned against the counter, lowering my voice. Did Mara say anything about the photo? She seemed uncomfortable. He shrugged, drying his hands. You know, both Mara and Celine, they're private. Not everyone likes their life posted online. But you didn't mind, I pressed gently. He chuckled. Mom, I barely notice. As long as Ivy's smiling, I'm happy. He kissed my cheek before heading back toward the living room, leaving me with the hum of the dishwasher and the hollow ache in my chest. I returned to the table, folding my napkin slowly. I felt like a guest in my son's home, careful not to disturb the fragile surface of their family life. Mara's laughter floated from the living room light and brittle, and Caleb joined her with a softness that made my throat tighten. I sat there, invisible, almost wondering why a harmless photo could rattle them so deeply, when to me it had only been a memory worth keeping. The weight of their silence pressed down until even Ivy's bright voice could not lift it, and I realized how much of my own family's truth was being kept just beyond my reach. The house felt emptier than usual after dinner at Caleb's. I returned to my quiet kitchen, set the dollhouse instructions on the counter where Ivy had left them, and stood listening to the faint tick of the clock. The silence pressed in heavy and insistent, demanding an answer to the question I had avoided all evening. Should I delete the photo? Celine's warning echoed in my ears. Mara's stiff reaction at the table replayed itself. Her smile too quick, her voice too smooth. Caleb's dismissal their private did little to soothe me. Privacy was one thing, panic was another. I picked up my phone, scrolling back through the gallery. The photos from the barbecue slid past Caleb, grinning at the grill, Ivy chasing Bubbles' neighbors, raising paper cups in cheer. I nearly closed it when another image caught me, one I had forgotten I'd taken in the rush of the afternoon. The candid frame was crooked, a little blurred, but it struck me harder than any of the polished shots. Mara stood slightly apart from the group, her hand slipped into the tall man's. His head tilted toward her, the brim of his blue cap shadowing his face, and behind them, caught in the faint reflection of the glass door, Celine watched. Her posture rigid, her gaze unwavering. My stomach tightened as I stared. This was no accident, no harmless pose. Mara's fingers curled naturally into his, and Celine had been there, present in secret, witnessing what she now demanded I erase. I set the phone down and pressed my palms to the table, my breath uneven. If I deleted everything, I could return to the illusion Caleb cherished to Sunday dinners filled with polite laughter. But what then? Pretend not to know. pretend not to see the shadows growing across my family. The decision churned inside me until it felt like my ribs might crack. At last I opened the app again. My hand shook slightly as I tapped the upload button and selected the candid. I kept the caption simple, almost bland. Another memory from yesterday. Family means everything. For a moment I sat frozen, my finger still hovering as though I could undo it by will alone. Then the screen refreshed, and the photo appeared on my feed, glowing beneath the caption. A wave of heat rushed through me, part fear, part relief. The responses came quickly, as they always did. A string of hearts and thumbs up from cousins, scattered across states from old colleagues who like to keep track of my family. Beautiful, one wrote. So glad you have these moments, another added. The affirmations felt hollow, though, like a chorus that hadn't noticed the wrong note in the melody. Then a new comment appeared, making my pulse stutter. Who's the stranger in the cap? It came from my cousin Lillian, sharp-eyed even from hundreds of miles away. I stared at the words until they blurred. Someone else had seen it. Someone outside the house, beyond my imagination, had noticed what I could no longer ignore. I tried to steady myself with a sip of water, but the glass rattled against the table. The photo was out now, beyond my control, and questions were spreading faster than I could catch them. The phone buzzed with another notification, then another. The likes kept coming, but so did the stares behind them, the quiet curiosity forming in the spaces between polite comments. I set the phone face down, pressing my hand flat against it, as though I could hold everything inside. But the truth was already seeping out, carried by pixels and captions, by eyes that would not stop looking. And in the deep quiet of the room, I knew I had opened a door, and there would be no closing it again, as the phone buzzed once more, louder, this time insistent. By morning, my phone had become a hive. Notifications stacked one after another, blinking at me like tiny warning lights. Some were harmless old friends gushing over Ivy's gap-toothed grin, cousins calling Caleb lucky. But threaded between the praise were quieter murmurs. Half questions typed in private messages. Who's the man by Mara? He looks close. Celine was there. I thought she hadn't come. Each word cut sharper than the last. What I had tried to pass off as another happy memory was quickly becoming a conversation I could not control. The shrill ring startled me, and Celine's name burned on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but habit won. Do you know what you've done? Her voice hissed through the line louder than I'd ever heard her. I posted a picture. I answered evenly, though my throat was dry. A picture of my family. Why should that shake you so much? You never listen, she snapped, her composure cracking. You never protect us, Mother. Not when it mattered, and certainly not now. Protect you from what? My hand clenched tighter around the phone. What is it I'm supposed to protect, Celine? Your silence. Mara's smiles. Caleb's blindness. The only sound was her breathing, ragged, before she muttered, You'll ruin everything, and hung up. I sat, staring at the dead screen, her words clawing inside me. Everything. What did everything mean? I barely had time to gather myself before the doorbell rang. The chime echoed too brightly in the quiet house. I moved to the porch and pulled the door open. Mara stood there, pale beneath her carefully done makeup eyes, rimmed in red. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, her fingers trembling. Take it down, she said without greeting. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual charm. Delete that photo before it spreads further. Her sudden appearance, the desperation in her eyes, chilled me. Why? I asked softly. What are you so afraid people will see? Her lips parted as if to answer, then pressed closed again. She looked past me into the hallway as though searching for Caleb or Ivy. Finding neither, she stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the morning air. "You don't understand," she whispered low and urgent. "It's not what you think. Just, please, Althea, for Caleb. For Ivy. Take it down." "For Caleb," I repeated, my voice catching. "Or for you." Her face flinched, the mask slipping for just a moment, then smoothed again. "You always misjudge me. You've never trusted me. But this isn't about trust, it's about survival." The words struck heavy with meaning I couldn't reach. I studied her, the delicate tremor in her jaw, the frantic gleam in her eyes, and all I could see was fear. Fear that matched Celine's, though theirs seemed carved from different stones. The silence stretched between us, thick with things unsaid. Mara shifted her weight, her knuckles white on the strap of her purse, as if she were holding back more than she dared reveal. I stepped aside only enough to block her path into the house. She stayed on the porch, a figure framed by morning light, fragile yet defiant. Neither of us spoke further. We didn't need to. The truth sat between us, heavy and unfinished, waiting for the next strike. And as she turned sharply and hurried down the steps, her heels clicking against the walkway, I knew the storm gathering outside my door was far from over, especially when the phone buzzed again in my pocket before she reached the street. Caleb arrived later that afternoon, the sound of his truck crunching against the gravel drive pulling me from my thoughts. Ivy spilled out of the passenger side before he even cut the engine, racing up the path with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She threw herself into my arms, chattering about the art project she wanted to finish at my kitchen table. Her joy was pure, unshadowed, and for a moment I clung to it like air. Caleb followed at a slower pace, a smile tugging at his lips, though the weight of exhaustion showed in the set of his shoulders. He carried a sack of groceries in one hand, depositing it on my counter, as if to balance the favor of my babysitting. "Mara's running late at work again," he said, almost apologetically. "Figured Ivy would enjoy some time here." I busied myself unloading the bag, nodding. She always does. We spoke about nothing in particular as Ivy spread crayons across the table, humming to herself. I watched Caleb's profile while he leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked older than 38 in that moment, lines of fatigue carved deeper than they should be. "You've been working too much," I said quietly. He chuckled. "Part of the job, Mom. Deadlines never care about sleep." I hesitated, then let the words slip out like a thread I wasn't sure I should pull. "Caleb, does Mara ever seem unsettled to you? Around family photos? I mean," his brows lifted, confusion softening his expression. "Unsettled. No, she just doesn't like having her picture plastered online. You know Mara private by nature. Honestly, I don't blame her." I folded a grocery bag, slowly trying to mask the tremor in my fingers. "She seemed tense at dinner, and she came by this morning asking me to delete one." He laughed lightly, dismissively. "That sounds like her. She worries too much about image. But loyal, absolutely. She'd never do anything to hurt us." His certainty struck me like a stone. I wanted to believe it, wanted to let his blind trust wash over me until it drowned my doubts. But the candid photo burned in my mind, Mara's fingers resting in the stranger's hand, Selene's reflection frozen behind them. I studied him. This son who had carried so much since his father's death, who had stepped into responsibility without complaint. He worked long hours to provide, came home to a daughter who adored him, and still managed a smile for me every Sunday. He had earned peace, not lies, and yet here he stood, defending Mara with the same faith he'd given every part of his life. Faith that steadied him, but blinded him too. I swallowed hard, the urge to confess pressing against my ribs. Caleb, I've seen things you haven't. Your wife's smile hides more than you know? The words nearly escaped, but I bit them back, afraid of shattering the fragile calm in his eyes. Instead, I reached out and touched his arm, offering a smile that felt heavier than it looked. I just want you happy, I said softly. I am, he answered, though the fatigue in his face betrayed him. He ruffled Ivy's hair, kissed my cheek, and left as quickly as he had come, leaving the air weighted with things unsaid. Ivy hummed, bent over her crayons while I stood at the window, watching Caleb's truck disappear down the street. My chest ached with guilt, torn between the truth I carried and the happiness I feared destroying, and I wondered if silence could ever protect him, or if it was already betraying him more than I dared admit. That night, the house seemed too still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I tried to read, to stitch, to distract myself with any of the quiet hobbies that usually carried me toward rest. But the words slipped from the page, the thread tangled in my lap. Nothing could silence the echo of Caleb's faith in Mara, or the image of her hand folded into another's. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, tracing its slow circles, and memory crept in like an unwelcome guest. My husband's voice, warm and steady, came back from those final years before he passed. He had thought he was protecting me when he kept the truth of his debts hidden. I had discovered the bills only after collectors began calling, their cold voices cutting through my routines. By then, the mortgage hung by a thread. He had begged forgiveness. I didn't want you to worry, he said, his hands rough as he tried to hold mine. But worry was not what almost broke me. It was the silence, the betrayal that nearly cost us our home. The man I trusted most had decided my ignorance was mercy, and in doing so, had nearly left me stranded. That lesson had scorched itself into me. Silence is not protection. It is corrosion. I turned on my side, pressing a pillow against my chest, as if to hold myself steady. Celine, with all her icy brilliance, had learned control from those same years. She built walls so tall no one could climb them, convinced that strength meant never revealing a crack. Caleb's sweet Caleb had taken the opposite path. Trust so boundless it blinded him a need to believe in goodness, no matter how thin it stretched. Both my children had inherited fragments of a flawed legacy's secrets, disguised as care. I traced the arc of their lives in my mind, how differently they carried pain, and realized I stood at the center of it now. With one photo, I had tugged the veil off their carefully kept illusions. Mara's panic, Celine's fury, Caleb's blindness, all of it circled me, demanding I choose whether to speak or remain still. The thought of breaking my son's heart nearly split me in two. I saw Ivy's small hands, her wide grin, her innocent joy. Did she deserve a world where smiles covered lies? Did Caleb deserve to keep pouring his love into something already cracked? I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, a vow renewed in the quiet. I would not carry silence as if it were safety. The truth, sharp as it might be, was better than a life built on shadows. Tears slid across my temple into the pillow, not from weakness but from the weight of what lay ahead. I had kept peace too long, swallowed doubt too many times, told myself that love alone could shield us. But love without honesty was nothing more than debt piling in secret, waiting to collapse. The clock ticked on. I did not sleep, not really. My body lay still, but my mind walked corridors of memory and fear, each step echoing the same conclusion. Silence had cost me once. I would not let it cost my son, my granddaughter, or whatever pieces of family we still had left. By morning, my eyes burned, but my resolve held steady. The decision had been made in the restless hours. I would not bury what I had seen. However painful, however destructive the truth was, the only path forward, and I knew the moment to speak it aloud, was drawing closer with each breath I took. The knock on my door was too sharp, too hurried to belong to a neighbor. When I opened it, Mara swept past me without waiting for an invitation, her heels striking against the hardwood like hammers. Her eyes were bright with anger, her lips pressed tight, and for the first time since she'd entered our family, her polished grace had slipped away. "You think you're noble," she spat, spinning to face me in the living room. "But you're destroying us." I closed the door quietly, letting her words settle in the air. Destroying what Mara A. lie. Her hands trembled where she clutched her purse. "You don't understand. You never have. Always suspicious, always looking for cracks in me. I won't let you tear this family apart because you can't keep your nose out of things." My chest tightened, but I forced my voice steady. I reached for the phone on the side table, opened the gallery, and held it up between us. The candid photo glowed on the screen, her hand clasped in the stranger's Celine's reflection behind them. "Then explain this," I said softly. Her face drained of color. She shook her head too quickly. "It's not no, you're twisting it." "Twisting it?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I didn't stage this moment. I didn't invent your hand where it shouldn't have been. Tell me the truth." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her breath ragged. Her shoulders sagged as though a weight had finally pulled her down. Tears welled, spilling against the edge of her mascara. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Please, Althea, believe me. It's complicated. I can't." The words broke off with the sound of the front door bursting open. Celine stood there, pale as chalk, her hair unpinned, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury. She looked at Mara first, then at me, and I realized this was no coincidence. They both knew. They both had come here chasing the same secret. "What are you doing here?" Mara's voice cracked, dripping with panic. Celine ignored her, striding across the threshold. Her hands shook, though her voice tried for steel. "Mother, stop this. Take the picture down. Now. You don't know what you're handling." I stared at the two women before me, the polished daughter-in-law unraveling the hardened daughter trembling beneath her mask. They faced each other like cornered animals bound not by trust, but by fear. "What don't I know?" I asked, my throat tightening. "What are you both so desperate to hide?" Neither answered. Mara's tears streaked her cheeks as she gripped her purse tighter, and Celine's jaw clenched until it looked painful. For once they were united, not in affection, but in silence. The tension vibrated through the room, a triangle of secrets closing in. I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest, heavier with each passing second. Mara whispered, "You'll ruin everything." Celine snapped, "She already has." I took a step back, clutching the phone against me as if it were a torch in the dark. Their fear was not of me, not truly. It was of what the image revealed, of what their silence had protected until now. And as the two of them stood there staring at each other, with the raw panic of people cornered by truth, I understood that whatever bound them together was far more dangerous than the photo itself. The room seemed to shrink, closing in with their silence, and I knew the next words spoken would change everything. After Mara stormed out and Celine fled behind her, the house fell silent again. I sat in the living room staring at the photo, glowing on my phone, as if the pixels themselves could unravel the truth. That man, tall, dark-haired, hidden beneath the brim of his cap, wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was the axis around which their panic spun. The next morning, I carried my questions with me to church. It wasn't faith that drew me there, but the need for familiar faces for the quiet hum of community that sometimes loosened secrets. After service, while coffee was poured into paper cups and chatter filled the fellowship hall, I found myself beside Miriam, an old friend with a knack for knowing names and places. I lowered my voice, sliding the phone from my purse. "Do you recognize him?" I asked, tilting the screen toward her. Her brow furrowed, then lifted in recognition. "That's Dr. Adrian Voss. He gave a lecture here last spring, some talk on medical ethics. Works with the research center downtown, doesn't he?" She leaned closer, squinting at the photo. "Why do you ask?" I smiled faintly, tucking the phone away before the question could land. "Just curious." The name struck me like a bell. Adrian Voss. I'd heard it before, not from church, not from Caleb, but from Celine. Years ago, she'd represented clients in a lawsuit against his company, a case involving mishandled drug trials, whispers of negligence buried under settlement papers. Celine had spoken of it briefly, then shut the door on the topic, saying only, "The deal is done. Don't bring it up again." Now the pieces arranged themselves with frightening clarity. Mara worked in medical research. Voss was her colleague. Celine had once fought him across a courtroom. Both women had reasons to fear his name tied to them. Back at home, I spread the fragments before me in thought. If Mara was entangled with him, it wasn't just about affection or betrayal. It could be about reputations, careers, perhaps money exchanged quietly. And Celine, so precise in her image, would be desperate to distance herself from any hint of conflict of interest. The lawsuit had ended in silence, but silence never lasts. I walked to the window, watching the leaves rattle against the glass, and pressed my palm against the sill. Caleb knew none of this. He still believed in Mara's loyalty, still brushed off her panic as preference for privacy. How could I tell him that the truth curling at the edges of his marriage wasn't only about his wife's faithfulness, but about a man whose name carried scandal? The weight of it settled heavy in my chest. I thought of Ivy, her laughter still echoing in the corners of my house. She deserved a world where adults spoke truth, where shadows didn't poison the air she breathed. But the truth now wasn't simple. It wasn't just a wife stepping outside her vows. It was a knot of ties, professional, legal, personal, that could drag all of us down if pulled too hard. I closed my eyes, remembering Mara's tears on my living room floor. Celine's voice shaking with rage, both of them clinging to silence as though their survival depended on it. Maybe it did. When I finally opened my phone again, Adrian Voss's name stared back from a quick search, his face polished in corporate photos. The same man from my candid image standing too close to Mara, watched by Celine from the shadows. And I realized with a chill that what threatened my family wasn't just a question of love. It was the kind of power that corrodes everyone who touches it. Celine came to me late unannounced, her knock softer than usual, almost timid. When I opened the door, she stood there without her usual armor of pressed suits and polished words. Her eyes looked raw, rimmed with sleeplessness. She didn't ask to come in. She walked past me as though afraid she'd lose her nerve if she waited. We sat across from each other in the living room. For a long moment, she stared at her hands, twisting them together, until I thought the bones might snap. Finally, she spoke. "I saw them," she whispered. My breath caught. Mara and the man Adrian Voss. Her head jerked in a sharp nod. That day at the barbecue. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I came anyway. I wanted to see for myself. And I did. She swallowed, eyes fixed on her knuckles. Do you understand what this means for me? I built my career on integrity, on fighting his company for their negligence. If anyone connects me to this, if they think I buried evidence because of family, it could ruin me. Her voice trembled, not with anger this time, but with fear. For the first time in years, she looked like the girl I once knew, fragile beneath the weight she carried. I sat back, the air thick between us. So that's why you demanded I take the photo down? Yes. Her gaze lifted, finally sharp again, but wet at the edges. You never think, Mother. You just act on what you believe is right, no matter the cost. But some truths cost too much. My entire career. Your career. My voice rose before I could soften it. What about Caleb's marriage? What about Ivy's home? You're worried about your reputation. Celine, while your brother is blind to betrayal under his own roof. She flinched, the words striking her as if I'd slapped her. Don't you dare twist this. Mara made a mistake, yes, but it doesn't have to destroy everything. If you would just delete the photos, no one else has to know. As if summoned by her name, the doorbell rang. Mara's figure filled the porch light when I opened it, pale, shaken, clutching herself as though the night air might crush her. I let her in, though every instinct warned against it. She barely sat before the words tumbled out. It was a mistake, a weakness, nothing more. Her eyes darted between us, pleading. Adrian and I, it was never serious. It was one moment and I regret it. Please don't let this ruin Caleb's trust. Don't let it ruin us. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I saw not the polished woman Caleb adored, but a frightened stranger begging for mercy. I pressed my hand to my forehead, the weight of both women pressing down on me. One asked for silence to save her career, the other for silence to save her marriage. And I, caught in the middle, was asked to betray one child to protect another. My heart pulled in opposite directions. Celine's pride, Caleb's faith, Mara's tears, Ivy's innocence, they all tangled into a web I could no longer navigate without tearing something apart. I looked at them both, my daughter and my daughter-in-law, united in desperation, though not in love. Their fear mirrored each other's, and I realized the truth I carried was not just heavy, it was radioactive. Whoever I chose to protect someone else would break. The clock on the mantel ticked on, steady and merciless. I folded my arms tight, trying to hold the pieces of my family together, knowing they were already slipping. And as silence settled thickly between us, I understood the decision I made next would ripple outward, cutting through all of us until nothing looked the same again. I told myself I would wait, that silence might protect us a little longer. But as I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, watching Mara and Celine both plead for their own version of secrecy, I knew I could no longer keep holding the weight alone. The truth was already too large to cage. I opened my phone once more, my hand steady now where it had trembled before. This time, I chose a different image, the candid shot with more of the background, the one that showed not just Mara and Adrian, but the angle of her body leaning into him, the closeness that couldn't be explained away as accident. Celine's reflection hovered faintly in the glass door, an uninvited witness caught by chance. I typed only a short caption. Another beautiful moment from our family gathering. Grateful for every memory. The words looked harmless, but the picture told a different story. With one breath, I pressed share. Almost immediately, the screen filled with activity. Dozens of likes, hearts, cheerful comments from relatives and friends. At first, the responses were the same as always. Praise for Ivy's smile, admiration for Caleb's steady presence. Then the tone shifted. Who's the man next to Mara? He doesn't look like family. Why is Celine in the reflection? I thought she wasn't there. Whispers spread quickly, slipping from the screen into phone calls. I didn't answer messages I couldn't keep up with. By the time Sunday came, the tension followed me into the pews at church. People smiled politely, but their eyes lingered too long. Their voices dropped to murmurs behind me. It didn't take long before it reached Caleb. That afternoon he came to my house, his face pale, his phone clutched in his hand like something toxic. Ivy trailed behind him, confused by his sharp tone, and I sent her into the kitchen with a coloring book before we sat down. He turned the screen toward me. Dozens of messages filled it, friends, co-workers, even a neighbor. Who is Mara with? Do you know this guy? His voice shook. Why would you do this to us, Mom? I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't look away. Not to you, Caleb. For you. Because what you refuse to see is hurting you more than you know. He sank onto the couch, shaking his head. This isn't protection. This is humiliation. You're making us into gossip. I slid my own phone across the table, the photo already open. I tapped the screen, enlarging the image until there was no room for denial. Look at her hand, Caleb. Look at the way she leans toward him. That's not a neighbor passing the time. That's intimacy. And Celine saw it too. She was there. His eyes flicked over the photo. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. He wanted to argue I could see it. He wanted to wrap himself in Mara's loyalty to keep his image of her intact. But the evidence glared at him, cruel in its simplicity. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, burying his face in his palms. God, Mom, he whispered. If you're wrong, you'll never undo this. And if you're right. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air between us carried the rest. Ivy's laughter floated faintly from the kitchen, too innocent to belong in the heaviness pressing down on us. Caleb lifted his head at last, his eyes red-rimmed, but clear, fixed on the image still glowing between us. And in that moment, I knew he stood at the edge of choosing between the painful truth I had laid bare, or the polished lie he still longed to believe. The house felt too small for all of us, though its walls had seen years of birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings without complaint. Now with Caleb sitting stiffly on the couch, Mara perched on the armchair across from him, and Celine, standing by the mantel, with her arms crossed, the air itself seemed to thrum with tension. I sat at the edge of my chair, hands folded tight in my lap. I had been the one to insist on this meeting, though I wasn't sure if it was wisdom or desperation that had driven me. Caleb's voice broke the silence, first heavy and flat. Tell me the truth. Both of you. Mara's face crumpled, her usual poise giving way to trembling lips. Caleb, I made a mistake. I let someone get too close. But it wasn't love. It wasn't an affair. I was lonely. You were gone so much with work and Adrian. He was kind. Her eyes darted to Celine before falling back to him. It was a weakness, nothing more. Caleb's jaw tightened. A weakness doesn't look like that photo, Mara. A weakness doesn't keep you up at night demanding my mother delete evidence. That was more than loneliness. Celine shifted her voice, cutting through like ice. This isn't about emotions. It's about damage control. The photo is out there, people are talking, and the more this festers, the worse it gets. What matters is containing it before it ruins all of us. Caleb turned toward her, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Damage control. That's what you care about. Her chin lifted. My career is on the line. So is your reputation, Caleb. This doesn't just affect your marriage, it affects the family name. I practice everything we've built." He looked between them, his face pale, his breathing uneven. "So that's all I am to either of you. A name, an image, something to protect so the gossip doesn't spread too far. No Mara," whispered tears slipping down her cheeks. "You are everything to me. I was weak, but I never stopped loving you." Her words hung in the air, but they rang hollow. Caleb's eyes darkened, and I saw something harden in him, something I had never seen in my son before. "All these years," he said slowly, "I've trusted both of you. I trusted my wife to be honest with me. I trusted my sister to tell me if something was wrong. And both of you stood there more worried about appearances than about me." Mara reached for him, but he recoiled as though her hand were fire. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't touch me. Don't lie to me. Not again." The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat rushing in my ears. Celine lowered her gaze. Mara sobbed quietly into her hands, and Caleb pulled his wedding band from his finger. He held it for a moment, staring down at the gold circle as if weighing all the years it represented, all the promises it carried. Then, with a motion both sharp and final, he threw it onto the coffee table. The ring clattered once before settling a small, lifeless sound that seemed louder than any shouting could have been. Mara gasped, her tears turning into a broken wail. Celine stiffened, her face unreadable, though her hands trembled against her arms. Caleb stood, his voice hoarse but steady. "I can't live inside lies. Not yours, not anyone's." He walked toward the door, shoulders squared, as if bracing for the collapse of everything he'd once believed. And as the door shut behind him, the ring still glinting on the table, I felt the fracture in my family widen beyond anything silence could mend. The slam of the door still echoed in my chest long after Caleb's footsteps faded down the walk. I caught a glimpse of Ivy's small face pressed against the truck window, confused but quiet, her wide eyes reflecting the weight she was too young to understand. Watching them drive away, I felt both relief that he was finally seeing the truth and grief that it had to cut him so deeply. Behind me, Mara broke into sobs that seemed to tear through the polished veneer she had always worn. She fell against the doorframe, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "Please, Althea, don't let him do this. Let me explain, let me make it right. I can fix us. I can fix this family if you'll just give me the chance." I steadied myself against the wall, her desperation pressing toward me like a tide. For a fleeting moment, I remembered the woman who had stood beside my son on their wedding day, radiant and full of promise. But that memory was no shield against what she had allowed to grow in the shadows. "No," I said, my voice low but unyielding. "Respect, first entry, second. You have not earned your way back into this house." Her face twisted with anguish. She stepped forward, but I closed the door gently, firmly, leaving her on the porch with her tears. Through the wood, I heard the muffled sound of her breaking, then the hurried retreat of footsteps. When I turned back, Celine stood in the center of the living room, her arms crossed, her eyes hard as glass. She had not wept, not even when Caleb's ring hit the table. Now she looked at me as though I had orchestrated the collapse. "You wanted this," she said coldly. "You've always thrived on drama, on tearing things open just to watch the fallout. Don't pretend this wasn't exactly what you wanted." I felt my blood stir, anger hot but clear. "No, Celine, I didn't want this. I wanted honesty. I wanted a family not built on rot. Truth is not chaos. Lies are." And you, I met her gaze squarely. You've been protecting lies for far too long. For a moment, her mask cracked. Her lips trembled, and I thought she might lash back with another accusation. Instead, she turned away, staring out the window, as if the glass offered an escape. The silence between us stretched sharp and heavy. I bent to pick up the ring from the table, its circle cold in my palm. It no longer belonged to Caleb, not tonight. It was only a reminder of promises of fractures of the price of silence left too long unbroken. When I set it down again, the room felt emptied of warmth, stripped bare by truth. And though I stood in my own house, I realized the silence I had once cherished here had been shattered, leaving me only with the sound of everything that had been lost. Weeks slid by like heavy stones, each one leaving a mark. The photo had started it, but what followed carved a chasm none of us could cross. By the time autumn settled in, the divorce papers were drafted and signed, their ink sharp and final against the page. Mara left quietly, her suitcases packed in the back of a rented car, her shoulders squared, though her eyes betrayed the humiliation she carried. The neighbors whispered, "Of course." In small towns, whispers travel faster than cars. Some pitied her, others condemned, but none forgot. She moved 2 counties away, and with her went the polished veneer she had worked so hard to maintain. Celine, meanwhile, buried herself in her work. She salvaged her career, maneuvering carefully so no one could tie her too closely to Voss or the tangled threads of that summer. Outwardly, she emerged unscathed, sharper than ever. But between us, something vital cracked. Our phone calls dwindled to short, clipped exchanges, her visits rare. When we did meet, she looked at me with a distance I couldn't bridge, as if I had forced her to live with scars she hadn't chosen. Perhaps I had. Caleb bore the weight most heavily. He looked older in a matter of weeks, the spark in his eyes dimmed by betrayal. Yet I saw something else, too, resolve. He rose each morning, made Ivy's breakfast, tied her shoelaces with steady hands. He went to work, came home, and tucked her in with a gentleness that told me he was determined not to let his brokenness become hers. And Ivy, sweet Ivy, she absorbed more than we wished she would. She stopped asking why her mother didn't come home, though sometimes her drawings showed a house split in 2, a child standing in the middle. In those moments, my heart ached so deeply, I thought it might never recover. I became her refuge, the place where bedtime wasn't filled with tension. She would curl against me on the couch, her hair smelling of soap, her small fingers resting in mine. I read her story after story. Fairy tales, adventures, anything that gave her a world where loyalty was rewarded and deception defeated. She listened with wide eyes, and when she finally drifted to sleep, I would sit there longer, whispering silent promises over her dreams. At night, when the house grew quiet again, I thought of the circle we had broken. My husband's hidden debts, Celine's cold defenses, Mara's false perfection. So many of us had chosen silence, convinced it would spare someone pain. But it had only multiplied. It passed down like an inheritance no one wanted. I wondered if Ivy, with her innocence and open heart, could be spared that weight. Caleb and I spoke often now, more than we had in years. His voice carried weariness, yes, but also a new honesty. We didn't pretend anymore. We didn't smooth over cracks. If he was hurting, he said it. If I feared for him, I admitted it. We sat at the kitchen table with truth laid bare between us, fragile but real. One evening, as I tucked Ivy into bed, she asked softly, "Grandma, are stories always true?" I smoothed her blanket and kissed her forehead. "The good ones are," I whispered, "and the best ones we make true ourselves." I turned off the lamp, leaving her in the glow of nightlight stars, and carried that thought with me into the silence that followed, knowing the hardest part was still to come. A year can change the shape of a life in ways you never expect. My house, once lined with carefully chosen portraits, posed smiles. Tidy moments now carried something different. The walls were filled with truth. Honest, unedited photos, Ivy with spaghetti sauce smeared across her cheeks. Caleb fixing a leaky faucet in his work clothes. Me caught mid-laugh with flour on my apron. Even photos from that summer, though painful, had their place. They belonged to the story, and I refused to erase them. Ivy noticed first. She was 7 now, taller, her curls bouncing when she followed me down the hallway. She stopped before a frame that held a picture of Caleb slumped on my porch steps, the day after Mara left his face drawn, but his arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Grandma?" She asked, her voice puzzled but not afraid. "Why don't you take away the sad ones? Why do you keep them up?" I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Because every truth matters, even the messy ones," I told her. "If we only kept the pretty parts, we'd forget what it took to get here, and forgetting doesn't help us grow." She frowned, thinking it over, then nodded slowly. "So, even the sad ones can be good." "They can," I said softly. "They remind us we survived." That afternoon, while Ivy colored at the table, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Celine stood there, her posture stiff as ever, though her eyes softened just slightly. She held a paper bag of pastries from the bakery in town, an unfamiliar gesture of peace. "I thought Ivy might like these," she said, her tone measured. I stepped aside, and for the first time in many months, she crossed my threshold, without a wall of ice around her. We sat in the kitchen while Ivy eagerly opened the bag. Celine's gaze traveled to the gallery of photos along the hallway, lingering on them with something between discomfort and curiosity. "You never used to hang so many," she remarked. "I never used to be so afraid of losing them," I replied. Silence settled, but it wasn't hostile this time. Fragile? Yes, like glass, that might crack with the wrong pressure, but not beyond repair. She reached for her coffee, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw the girl she had been before the armor hardened around her. Caleb joined us later that evening. His hair was flecked with early gray now, his smile quieter, but it was real. The kind of smile that didn't try to hide scars, only acknowledged them. He bent to kiss Ivy's head and sat beside her, watching her chatter with Celine about school. For the first time, I saw my son not as broken, but as freer, lighter, even if still carrying the marks of betrayal. We ate dinner together, conversation halting at times, but genuine. Ivy laughed. Celine listened more than she spoke, and Caleb's smile lingered at the edges of the table like a steady lamp. Later, when the house grew quiet again, I stood in the hallway looking at the collage of photos glowing in the lamplight. The walls no longer told a story of perfection, but of truth, and that truth, though scarred, felt like light itself. And as I turned toward the bedroom, I wondered if when truth finally stands in the open, the next step is forgiveness, or if freedom alone is enough to carry us forward. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than lonely. Evening light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, touching the frames on the walls and the stacks of Ivy's drawings left scattered across the table. Caleb had taken her home an hour ago, her laughter still lingering faintly in the air. I sat at my desk, the top drawer, opened the brass spare key resting in my palm. It had been there for years, meant for Mara, once meant as a gesture of welcome into the family. I had never actually given it to her. At the time, I thought I was simply slow to trust. Now, holding its cold weight in my hand, I understood it had always been more than that. It was a symbol of entry of belonging, of the threshold between trust and intrusion. I turned it over, the metal catching the lamplight. For so long, I believed protecting my family meant holding back the truth, keeping things tidy and intact, sparing them the sharp edges of reality. That's what I told myself when I swallowed doubts, when I stayed quiet about tensions, when I looked the other way. I thought silence was love, but silence had nearly ruined us, my husband's debts hidden for my sake. Celine's walls of ice built from secrets she could never share. Caleb's blind faith nurtured by our unwillingness to show him pain, all of it had grown from silence. And Mara's smile, bright and false, had thrived in that silence until the cracks finally showed. Now I knew. Protection wasn't silence. Protection was honesty even when it cut deep, especially when it cut deep. I placed the key back into the drawer, not discarded, but not handed out either. It belonged there until someone could approach with respect, not entitlement. I slid the drawer shut with a quiet finality that felt like closure. Crossing the room, I turned on the lamp by the window. Its glow spilled into the night, a steady beam against the dark. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the sill, the words slipping from me like a prayer. Not for intrusion, only for respect. The lamp's glow reflected faintly in the glass, and I saw myself looking back older, lined with the years but steadier than I had been in a long time. The storms had come, yes, and they had left scars, but the house still stood. We still stood. I thought of Ivy, her small voice asking why I kept the messy photos. I thought of Caleb, shoulders straighter now, though shadows lingered in his eyes. And even Celine, still distant, but not unreachable. They would all carry their pieces of truth forward just as I carried mine. Silence may delay storms, I realized, but it never prevents them. Only truth clears the air, no matter how fierce the winds. And once the storm passes, there is space again for light, for growth, for beginnings, not built on lies. I turned from the window, the lamp steady at my back, and walked slowly down the hallway, lined with photos, some joyful, some painful, all true. And I knew as I touched each frame in passing that when respect finally knocked, I would be ready to choose whether to open the door or guard it forever. Outline.